Hello, my name is Alex. Today we are going to continue with where we left the other day, which basically was that we created a module. Modules can have their name changed. For example, I'm going to call it mtest, for example. In this way, you can know, for example, what is inside each module you are creating. If we double click, you see it now is open module test. In Excel, there are different data types and also there are different ways to define variables, but there are some rules that we must follow. The first important rule for defining variables is that the variable name must be not a reserved keyword from Visual Basic. Visual Basic uses certain keywords like, for example, dim, private, function, loop, or other keywords that can exist inside this programming language. Also, if you want to define a variable, it is not permitted to use special characters. This could be, for example, this character or this character. You cannot use any of those to define a variable. You cannot also start a variable with a number. So, for example, 3 something is not a valid variable name. Also, you have to take into account that when defining variables, there is a limit to the character length of the variable, that is 255 is the limit of the character length. So, for example, let's create a subroutine, which is basically part of the code that Excel identifies we want to run. For example, we want to create subroutine test. And inside it, we want Excel to do some stuff. Let's say, for example, we want to define a variable. So we can say dim a as integer. Okay? And now we can see that a is equal to 5. As you can see, what we have done until now is basically we define a variable named a, and we told Excel that it is an integer type. We have different types that we can use inside this programming language. The most common ones that we will be using now at the beginning are string, which is used to store text, boolean, which is used to store the values true or false, integer, that is the one that we are using currently, and it is used to store whole numbers. We also have double, which is basically used to store numbers that contain decimals. And there is also a special type called date that is specifically used to store dates. So for example, here we are creating the variable a and we are setting it to 5. If you click on the left part of any on this bar, the code will stop just before this line. This means that we'll define a will set it to 5, and it will stop there instead of suddenly ending the code. Why is this interesting? If we execute the code, to execute this subroutine, you have to have your cursor inside the subroutine. So for example, here is a valid position, or here, and when you press play, you see, we have the subroutine test with a, which is set to 5, and here it is. This is why this window was very important, because when we want to debug things and test if our code is working, we can go step by step, putting what is known as the breakpoints. That is, it is what we just did here. There is also another type of definition for the variables. Instead of saying dim, and we set the type, we can say constant a equals to 5. What this is doing is setting our variable a to 5, and it is a constant value. This means that it cannot be changed by any means during the execution of our code. If we execute the code, as you can see, we still get the result of a equals to 5. But What is the difference between this case and the previous one? If we go to the previous one and we say, for example, a is equal to a plus 2, our new value of a, if we put here a breakpoint, you will see, here it's 5. But once it executes this line, so if we click play again, it will go to the second breakpoint. You see, a is now 7. What happens if we have the constant? As you can see, this is what happens. We are not allowed to change the value of a constant. Some other operations that we can do with a variable are as follows. We can, for example, multiply a variable. Now it's 10. We can divide a variable. And we can subtract value from a variable. As you can see, for example, from the division, 5 divided by 2, we get that the result is 2. Why? Because we are using integer type, so we can only get whole values. If we would actually like to get the exact result from dividing, what we can do is change the data type. So instead of being an integer, we can actually use a double. You see? Now it works. To summarize, you have learned in this tutorial how to define variables, how to set their data types. Also, you know how to do some basic operations, and you also know how to use the breakpoints.